As the train slowed to a halt, its wheels grinding against the tracks, the air was thick with the scent of impending change. The dust barely settled before she disembarked, her boots thudding decisively against the icy platform, her paper ticket crumpling in her calloused hand. She stepped down, unaided, her presence unnoticed, her name unasked. They didn't need to know her. Her story was already written in the lines of her face and the wear of her attire. Dressed in a plain skirt, heavy boots, and a shawl clutched tightly against the uncaring wind, she was a figure sculpted by hardship. Her hands were her storytellers, cracked at the knuckles, bruised around the nails. They spoke of a life of lifting burdens, not of gentle holding. These hands had borne more than their fair share, lifting what others had left behind. Under the station's overhang she paused. Her breath formed small, cloudy puffs, stark white against the biting air. Snowflakes danced on her lashes as she blinked them away, then turned her gaze toward the town she had come to call home, to marry into. It wasn't a town of grandeur or beauty. A church steeple leaned westward as if tired, a saloon sagged under the weight of the wind, and a sign, half its letters faded, announced a general store. Yet to her, after years hunched over laundry tubs and kitchen stoves, this rugged place seemed like fertile ground where something tender might finally take root. She walked with purpose, each step heavier than the last, not from fear, but from a profound hope, the heavier burden. The letter he had sent promised a wife who could work, not a fragile porcelain doll. He valued grit, and grit was what she had in her teeth most mornings, grit in her very bones. There he was, waiting in front of the sheriff's office, arms crossed his coat, too clean for the weather. He eyed her up and down as one might at a stock auction, and with a dismissive shake of his head, he declared, "This is a mistake." But she, with her eyes full of the stories her hands could never tell, opened her mouth to speak. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat, leaving her silent as the weight of the train ticket still pressed into her fingers. "You're not what I asked for," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I meant work ethic, not roughness." He didn't say ugly, yet the word loomed between them and as palpable as the smoke from a distant fire. "You said you wanted someone who could labor." He nodded. "Yeah, behind closed doors. I don't need folks thinking I married a dockhand." The street had hushed its usual bustle, subdued. A figure emerged from the saloon, eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before him. She swallowed not the lump in her throat, but the rising tide of anger beneath it. "I crossed two territories, spent everything I had," she declared, her voice steady despite the storm inside. He shrugged, indifferent. "Ain't my problem." The town watched on, not with shouts or jeers, but with a silence that branded her soul, marking her as different as other. She walked away, her back straight, eyes forward, not looking back. She didn't cry, not when the boarding house turned her away, claiming rooms were for decent or paying girls, nor when her last coin slipped into the grubby hand of a boy half her size for a meager crust of bread. That night she sat behind the post office, her back to the cold, unforgiving wall, arms wrapped around her knees. Her breath clouded in the chill air, a fleeting ghost before it vanished. She thought of home not out of longing, but because she questioned if she still had one. A cat slinked by, its eyes glinting in the moonlight, not even pausing to acknowledge her plight. She pondered the soft girls, those with bright eyes and voices as sweet as sponge sugar. Girls who learned to curtsy, not carry, who looked picturesque in photographs and never bled through their gloves. She didn't hate them, she just wasn't one of them, and no one had ever shown her how to pretend. By morning, the frost had dusted her hair with silver. Shaking it off, she stood, her chin set with defiance, and walked the town with a resolve that would not be easily broken. "Work," she whispered to herself, the mantra that kept her going. Find work, any work. The bakery welcomed her, not for the sweet art of baking, but for the humble task of scrubbing. Buckets, floors, the soot-caked ovens. She faced them all without complaint. Dirt held no terror for her. It was the people with their piercing gazes that made her heart race. The girl at the counter saw right through her, a ghost in plain sight. The baker's wife barked orders as if she were speaking to a statue. Yet she persisted. Her arms screamed in agony, but she scrubbed. The heat seared her palms, yet she persisted. Outside, the whispers floated. That labor girl, she worked so hard. Then there was him, tall, quiet. Not the kind of quiet that seeks attention, but the kind that holds it effortlessly. A rancher, they said, dwelling just beyond the ridge. He spoke only when necessary, judged only when asked. She watched him. The gentle way he handled feed, the tender care with which he tied his horse, the discreet kindness when he left a loaf by the widow's door, or unseen by all but her. His gaze was different, not the pitying or dismissive looks she was accustomed to. He looked at her as if she were real, not some specter to be ignored or pitied. One fateful afternoon, as she struggled with a crate of flour sacks, her fingers betrayed her. The crate toppled, a cloud of flour rising like a ghostly apparition. The baker's wife unleashed a string of curses. The counter girl's laughter rang out. But before the dust settled, before the embarrassment could fully take hold, the rancher was there. Kneeling beside her, he didn't utter a word of reprimand. Instead, he silently lifted one sack, then another, helping her rebuild the fallen stack. His actions spoke volumes. With a tip of his hat, he walked away, leaving her speechless, her throat constricted by emotions too profound for words. That evening, her only pair of stockings, mended with thread so delicate it snapped twice before finally holding, symbolized the fragile threads of her existence. Her hands ached a pain that wasn't hollow but filled with the weight of her endurance. In the weeks that followed, their paths intertwined like windswept trails, each encounter a gentle breeze stirring the dust of routine. At the well, he offered her the ladle first, a simple act of kindness. At the store, he stepped aside, letting her go ahead in line. At church, he chose a pew 3 rows behind, close enough to acknowledge yet distant enough to avoid the town's prying eyes. Neither asked the other's name, yet the space between them seemed to shrink with each passing day. The town, ever watchful, began to murmur. "She's got her claws in him," the baker's wife whispered, her voice laced with a mix of envy and disapproval. "She'll trap him." "Just wait," chimed the counter girl, her words sharp as a winter's frost. "She's not marriage material. She's work stock." The judgments bit deep, colder than the air. She didn't cry, not until the day her knees gave out in the kitchen and the world spun into darkness. When she awoke, there was cold air on her face, a coat draped over her shoulders, and the quiet rancher, as if he had been carved into the porch rail, watching the horizon. "You fainted," he said, his voice as steady as the earth. "Could have cracked your head." She nodded, her throat tight with unshed tears. "Water's there. I'll walk you back when you're ready." She tried to thank him, but her gratitude tangled like the broken fence wire she often mended, so she nodded again. When he stood and extended his hand, she took it. His palm was warm, dry, calloused like hers, but it felt like safety, like a promise of something more than survival. The town's whispers grew louder, now accusing her of bewitching him, insisting a woman like her should know her place. She heard every word, but for the first time she didn't bend beneath the weight of their scorn, because one man hadn't looked away. And sometimes that's all it takes to make a woman remember she exists, to remind her that even in a world of whispers and judgments, there can be a hand to hold a gaze that doesn't waver a moment, where she is not just seen but truly witnessed. The next morning she returned to work. Her spirit buoyed, her head held just a tad higher. With deft fingers, she mended the oven hinge without a word of guidance. As she swept the bakery stoop, a small treasure caught her eye, tucked beside the steps, a sprig of wintergreen bound with twine. No note accompanied it, yet its silent message spoke volumes louder than any words she had ever received. For the first time in ages, she allowed a small, hopeful smile to grace her lips, a gentle thaw against the long winter of her heart. The snow arrived prematurely that year, not in a deluge, but just enough to cloak the porch railings and quiet the winds. It softened the town's stark outlines, yet left its people unyielded. She navigated through this winter landscape with the ease of one accustomed to its bite. Shawl tightly wrapped, gaze unwavering, her hands chapped from labor's skin, cracking at the knuckles. She was not a woman to wait for spring's kindness to emerge. Whispers still swirled in the town behind barrels between the aroma of fresh baked goods and over sewing circles where fingers outpaced hearts. She's making eyes at him, someone murmured. Not proper the way she hovers near his land. She'll wear him down. They always do. These whispers never reached her ears directly, but they found their mark embedding like splinters she didn't dare to remove until one morning the pain was too much to ignore. He, the rancher, never acknowledged these rumors. But one crisp morning as she passed the general store with a basket of freshly mended linens, she discovered a bundle of 3 freshly cut logs neatly tied sitting on the top step. She paused not out of necessity, but from the unexpected kindness of the gesture. She carried the logs home, their weight seeming to vanish in her grasp. Later that week he stopped. As she diligently scrubbed the bakery floor, she didn't even glance at the tempting display of freshly baked bread or the alluring array of sweets. Instead, she simply inquired, "Have you ever fixed hinges?" Her hands were still dripping with soapy water as she blinked up at him. "I've tried," he responded with a nod. "Mine are sticking, if you've got a moment." Intrigued, she followed him out without asking for clarification on what he meant by mine. His land sprawled before them, and serene with nothing but a fenced pasture and a barn that sloped gently against the landscape. There were no flowers, just the stark utility of farm life. His house was modest, square, and weathered, yet it stood resilient, a testament to enduring countless storms. She admired its steadfastness. He didn't offer her tea, nor did he attempt any charm. He simply led her to the problematic door, then stepped back, giving her space as if entrusting her with a piece of his world. She knelt down, examined the hinge closely, and reached for his toolbox without uttering a word. "Not many women know how to fix things," he remarked. After a while, his voice tinged with a mix of admiration and surprise. She kept her focus on the screw, her voice quiet but firm. "Most women don't get the chance." His silence took on a new form, less about distance and more about listening, truly listening. She lingered longer than intended, repairing the coop, hoisting feed sacks, and scrubbing soot from the hearth with a rag she had brought from home. Meanwhile, he cooked not with skill, but with sincerity, producing biscuits that were too hard and eggs that were too soft. Yet the meal they shared filled the space between them with a tender warmth. She savored every bite. When it was time for her to leave, he walked her to the gate. He didn't ask her to come back yet. She returned 3 days later, her hands carrying a spool of thread and oil for the door. They settled into a rhythm. She visited most Thursdays, and he left small tasks undone, not out of inability, but because she could do them. She mended what was broken, and he nourished what was hungry. Words were sparse between them, but in their silence, they were crafting something profound, something beyond mere acquaintance, not yet love, but a beginning of something precious. Know how to express the whirlwind of emotions swirling within her. But as she gazed into his earnest eyes, words seemed unnecessary. Respect, she realized, was not just in the quiet moments, but in these gestures that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. One day, amidst the mundane clatter of her workbench, she discovered a pair of gloves, not new but lovingly mended, lying there as if placed by fate. No note accompanied them, just the silent presence of him. Hat in hand, his gaze tender, yet piercing. "Yours were tearing," he murmured, his voice a soft caress. "Figured it's time someone looked after your hands for once." Her throat tightened, words failed her, and so she simply donned the gloves, her heart swelling with a gratitude too profound for speech. From that day, her hands ached less, not just from the gloves, but from the warmth of his care. The town's winter dance loomed a tradition more of obligation than of celebration. She had no intention of attending, remembering only the distant echo of a time when she danced in a mill town where men's whistles were more familiar than their words. Her body had since become a vessel for labor, not for leisure. Yet on that fateful morning, he stood at her doorstep, a small wrapped parcel in his hands. "Not a dress," he clarified hastily, "just a ribbon for your hair. Thought it might feel good to wear something not earned. She looked at it, almost afraid it might shatter under the weight of her gaze. You don't have to come, he added, his voice laced with hope. But if you do, I'd be glad. That night, with the ribbon adorning her hair, she walked to the church hall, her head high, the snow whispering secrets to her sleeves. The room fell silent upon her entrance, not out of shock, but out of the unexpected presence of someone who was not meant to be there. The satin-clad girls whispered among themselves, the preacher's wife's eyes narrowed in judgment, yet he, with unwavering steps, crossed the room, his hand extended in an invitation. She took it, both of her hands enveloping his one, and they danced. Not with the grace of the ballroom, but with the sincerity of two souls finding solace in each other's company, swaying gently, each step a testament to a bond unspoken but deeply felt. Left, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the hearth fire, a glow from within that spoke of recognition and respect. That night, she didn't rush to sleep. Instead, she lingered in the quiet, her thoughts a whirl of what-ifs and maybes. The whispers persisted like the relentless winter wind, but now they carried a different tune. Why did she dance with him? They murmured, eyes following her every move with a mix of curiosity and condemnation. Yet her heart, once a silent spectator to her own life, now beat with a fierce rhythm of defiance. She didn't return to the ranch that day, nor did she tend to the chores that were usually her silent companions. Instead, she sat by her window, watching the snowflakes dance in the moonlight, each one a fleeting moment of beauty in the harsh winter landscape. Did she dare to dream of something more? Was it possible that in his gaze she had seen not just acceptance, but a shared longing for something neither of them had dared voice? The next day, when he appeared at her doorstep, hatless and unburdened by the cold, she felt her pulse quicken. His presence was like a balm to the sting of the town's gossip. You didn't come, he said, his voice a mix of concern and something unspoken. No, she replied, her voice steady, her eyes locked onto his, seeking truth in their depths. I didn't. He looked at her, then down at his boots, as if the answers to their unspoken questions lay buried in the snow. I didn't mean to cause trouble. He confessed, his words hanging between them like the cold, crisp air. You didn't, she assured him, her voice firm yet gentle. They talk, they always do. He nodded, stepping closer, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. I don't care what they say, he declared, his voice resolute. I don't want soft hands, I want steady ones. She looked up, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and hope. You sure? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never been more, he affirmed, his gaze unwavering, speaking volumes in the silence. He didn't touch her, didn't ask anything more, but when he left, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the hearth's fire, a glow from within that spoke of recognition and respect. As he walked away, she closed the door gently behind him and leaned against it, her heart a tempest of newfound emotions. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel the urge to vanish into the shadows. She felt desired not as a trophy to be won or an object of pity, but for the very essence of who she was. That night, a candle flickered to life beside her window. Whether he would see it or not was immaterial to her. This was for her, for the girl who once carried wood, now a woman who carried her own worth. Gradually, she began visiting without invitation. Not daily, not always with a purpose, but often enough that his porch became a liminal space, a bridge between her past and a future she dared not yet name. Sometimes she brought a folded cloth, another time a jar of lard, just enough for biscuits. He never inquired, and she offered no explanations. Mornings found her chopping kindling or mending feed sacks, her hands still bearing the testament of hard work, yet her shoulders now carried a newfound calm, as if she had ceased to brace herself for rejection. The ranch itself seemed to pause in her presence. He didn't clutter the silence with unnecessary words, nor did he resort to charm or flattery. His silence was profound, creating space. He listened, truly listened, without ever cutting in. He repaired what was broken, but with a patience that respected the slow healing of what was mending. And she began to unfurl not in the sudden burst of spring flowers, but in the quiet, persistent way something grows under snow, rooted, steady, enduring. One crisp morning, he handed her a tin box. Inside, she found buttons, needles, scraps of wool, and a note penned in a careful slanted script, "Figured you might want your own." Her finger grazed the box as if it might disappear, her throat tight with emotion, holding back tears that threatened to spill. How could something so simple mean so much? Here was a man who saw her not just her struggles, but her potential, her becoming. Never had she known such a bond, yet now she did. There were no declarations of love, no vows of eternal commitment, just an unspoken trust that blossomed through the mundane. A mug warmed by the hearth for her comfort, a shirt laid out with the silent hope she'd mended his coat, hanging next to hers, as if it had always belonged there. He spoke of his land once, not of its worth or size, but of its resilience. The east fence was swept away by the flood, he murmured one evening as the clouds gathered ominously. That year we lost the calf, almost lost myself too. She met his gaze, her eyes offering no demand for elaboration. Some sorrow, she understood, required space, not solutions. She resumed her humming, the gentle, unrecognizable melody that spoke of her presence, her perseverance, her essence. It accompanied her as she tinkered with the barn door's latch-kneaded dough with rhythmic precision, or walked the familiar path back home. One evening he returned to find her in his garden frost, dusting her skirt, her fingers bare against the cold. With a weathered spade, she turned the soil, her eyes focused, intent. "Can't grow much this time of year," he remarked, watching her. "I'm not planting—" she replied, her voice soft yet firm, "just letting the ground know I haven't forgotten it." He stood there a long moment, passing before he added, "I reckon it won't forget you either." The townsfolk still murmured, but their whispers had softened, tinged now with curiosity rather than scorn. "She's still around," someone noted. "She never left." "She's still not proper," another added, but the sting of those words had dulled. She no longer wilted under their judgment. Instead, she was growing into something far stronger. On a Sunday, she brought bread uneven, slightly overbaked. She offered an apology, but he savored every crumb, his gratitude evident in each slow, deliberate bite. The next time she arrived with apple jam, a testament to her presence, her persistence, her becoming. The tartness of the apple was a shock, but its vibrant hue coaxed a smile from her lips. "I didn't know you could cook," he remarked, his voice laced with genuine surprise. She chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling with a newfound discovery. "Neither did I," she confessed, her laughter mingling with the fresh spring breeze. In the tender days of early spring, he presented her with a small pouch, its contents rustling softly like whispers of hope. "Not much," he said, his voice humble, "but they're yours if you want them." Her fingers, delicate and cautious, cupped the seeds as if they were a precious gem. "What are they?" she inquired, curiosity piqued. "Snapdragon," he answered, a soft smile playing on his lips. "Used to be my ma's favorite. I've never grown flowers myself." He tilted his head, watching her intently. "You're growing something now." He added, his words a gentle nudge into the world of nurturing life. One evening, as the wind brought a whisper of warmth after weeks of chill, they sat on the porch. He handed her a carved wooden bird, its edges rough with the marks of his dedication. "I started whittling again," he said almost shyly. "It's lovely," she responded, her voice filled with warmth. "Meant to be a dove, but looks more like a lump with wings," he confessed with a sheepish grin. Her laughter was like the first rays of sunlight after a storm, bright and healing. "A real one," he smiled. "A quiet kind, like the land when it rains." "You don't have to bring things," she murmured, her voice low, touched by his persistent kindness. "I know," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "Then why do you?" she asked, her eyes searching his for an answer. "Because when you carry heavy things, someone ought to carry something for you," he said, his eyes conveying a depth of understanding. One morning, she discovered a tin of honey on her doorstep, its presence a silent testament to his care. No note accompanied it, but she knew. Stirring it into her tea, she sipped slowly, each taste like warmth on cracked lips, like something earned through shared moments. They seldom touched, just a brush of fingertips when passing, tools, a steadying hand on her elbow once when she stumbled. But every glance spoke volumes louder than any words could. He saw her not as a burden to bear, nor as a project to fix, but as someone choosing to stay when every fiber of her being urged her to flee. And she in turn saw him not as a savior to rescue her, nor as a prize to win, but as someone who let her be, who stood by her side, carrying his own load while helping her with hers. Once more the town's dance approached, this time heralding the arrival of spring. She harbored no expectations of an invitation, feeling no need for one. Yet 2 days prior, a surprise awaited her, a package left at her doorstep. Inside lay a dress of the gentlest blue, unadorned, yet lovingly stitched. With trembling hands, she lifted it, and beneath it discovered a note not for the dance, but for the girl who never dared to dream of wearing such a gown. That evening in the barn where the light filtered through the wooden slats, she stood clutching the dress to her heart. She didn't weep, but her shoulders trembled, not from sorrow, but from the profound realization that someone had seen beyond her past deeds to the woman she was becoming. At the dance, she did not whirl or glide. She simply stood beside him, her posture proud, her head held high. And in that moment, no one dared to murmur, for the woman who had once lugged firewood, repaired hinges, and scrubbed floors, now bore herself with a sacred grace. They danced but once, yet when he placed his hand upon her back and locked eyes with her, she forgot every bruise she had concealed, enveloped instead by the sound of her own breath in his serene silence. Words were scarce that evening, but as he escorted her home and lingered at her threshold, she turned to him, her voice a whisper of uncertainty. "I don't know what this is." He nodded, his voice equally soft. "Neither do I, but it feels like something that doesn't have to hurt." She paused, then gently touched his hand. Not a kiss, not yet, just a touch, like the first rain on parched earth after years of drought. And in the stillness that followed, she closed her door with the gentlest of smiles, for sometimes the slowest blooms are the ones that endure the longest. Sometimes the hand that carried firewood was always meant to carry something far more precious. They arrived with the grit of the road on their boots and a sharp edge to their voices, a trio more refined than the townsfolk, their faces too sleek for the rugged landscape. Among them was a woman older, her face etched with bitterness, yet her mouth mirrored another's. That's how she recognized her, her sister, or rather the ghost of her sister. And there beside her stood the suitor who had once dismissed her at the train station, branding her as rough, unworthy, unfit. "I hear you've been living like a squatter," he proclaimed, his voice slicing through the air for all in the general store to hear. "Didn't think you'd cling to this place like a weed." She remained silent, her arms crossing protectively over her stomach, standing a little taller. The woman beside him flashed a sharp, cutting smile. "You're making a fool of yourself. You're not his wife, not his help. You're nothing. We've come to take you home." Still, she said nothing, but something within her coiled tighter, not out of fear, but in defiance. That afternoon, the quiet rancher descended from the hill, his pace deliberate, hands dusted from his work. With a saw, his eyes serene yet unyielding. He didn't address the intruders. Instead, he positioned himself beside her close enough for their shoulders to touch, close enough to be counted. The sister sneered, her voice dripping with scorn. "Oh, I see. So this is what it's come to. Playing house with a stray, I thought you had better taste." The suitor laughed, but the rancher did not. He simply regarded them with a slow, steady gaze. Then in a voice that wasn't loud but echoed like thunder in a drought, he declared, "She's not a stray. She's stronger than anyone I've met. And this house, it's hers too, if she wants it." The sister's face flushed a deep red. "You can't keep her. I'm not, I am not a piece of property to be bartered or sold," she declared, her voice a calm, clear stream cutting through the clamor of the gathered crowd. I refuse to go with you. You are bound by blood, but I am not. Her eyes unflinching locked onto her sister's. Blood does not dictate our destiny anymore. As the sun dipped low, the townsfolk converged, their curiosity a palpable force, just as it had been when she first arrived. But this time she stood unyielded, her work skirt billowing slightly in the evening breeze, her sleeves rolled up, her hair untamed by the wind. Her hands, once hidden in shame, now bore their marks of toil with pride. The suitor's voice cut through the murmur sharp as a whip. This is an outrage. She was promised, she was bought with my gold. Her father accepted my payment. The rancher, stepping forward with a quiet authority, countered, she is not for sale. And you must return what was given, the suitor demanded. Before the rancher could respond, she stepped boldly forward. I will repay it myself. A scornful laugh erupted from the suitor. With what flour and earth? Reaching into her shawl, she withdrew a small battered tin box. With deliberate slowness, she opened it to reveal a pouch of coins, her earnings from every floor she'd scrubbed, every shirt she'd mended, every loaf she'd sold under the cover of secrecy. She emptied the contents into her palm. Here, take it, she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. This is what I am worth to you, isn't it, mere metal and silence? The coins clattered to the ground at his feet, and she turned her back on him, on the town, on the past. He did not stop her, nor did anyone else, for some truths need no defense, only the courage to be spoken. That night, instead of retreating to the safety of the ranch, she walked beyond it, past the fields and into the woods, where the air was purer and the silence spoke of freedom. Standing among the stark trees, she inhaled deeply, each breath steadying her until the trembling ceased. Her spirit had not broken, though her heart had weathered many storms. She stood firm even when her knees pleaded to buckle under the weight of her trials. Then came the morning when a gentle knock echoed through her home. Upon opening the door, she found the rancher, his presence as comforting as a warm blanket on a chilly night, holding a small wooden box. He didn't thrust it upon her. Instead, he looked at her with eyes that saw not a broken soul, but one beautifully endured by time. Had something to show you, he murmured, his voice like the soft rustle of leaves. Leading her down a path she'd walked 1,000 times, they arrived at a sight that made her heart skip a beat. A cabin not new but lovingly restored. Its floor was swept clean, porch boards replaced, and smoke danced from the stovepipe, painting the sky with promises. He opened the door, stepping aside as if to say, this space, this piece is yours to claim. Inside, a simple table, 2 chairs, a shelf adorned with her gloves, a place for her tin box, and a folded blue ribbon spoke volumes of his care. He didn't fill the silence with words. His actions had already spoken. This is for you if you wish to accept it. If you choose to stay. His eyes conveyed without a sound. Her eyes, now bright with unshed tears, met his. I don't want to be rescued, she declared, her voice steady yet soft. You weren't, he replied, his gaze steady. You stood. I just built a place where you could come home to yourself. With a single nod, she stepped inside, her heart expanding with the warmth of belonging. She didn't leave. A few days later, she visited the general store, her steps lighter, her heart fuller. She purchased nails, a spool of blue thread, and a bolt of gentle fabric, all with coins she had earned herself. The girl at the counter watched curiosity in her eyes. Are you making a dress? She asked, intrigued. No, she replied with a serene smile. A curtain. Thought it was time the window had something lovely. In the weeks that followed, whispers ceased. No one called her names, nor did they elevate her to sainthood or nobility. She was simply herself, the woman who once carried wood, the woman who planted seeds before the frost had fully melted, the woman who was invited, not imposed upon. One spring morning, as the world outside bloomed anew, she hung that blue curtain, a symbol of her resilience and newfound home. The sunlight danced on the window, casting a warm glow through the folds of the curtains. A delightful aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the scent of rich earth and cedar, enveloping the house in comfort. He entered from the field, his boots caked with mud, yet his eyes sparkled with a gentle warmth. She with grace poured 2 cups of coffee, setting them down with a tender clink. As their hands brushed, she reached for his, not out of gratitude or need, but simply to feel the comforting touch of his skin against hers. No words were necessary, just a shared warmth between hands that had known only the toil of labor. Later, by the crackling fire, they sat in chairs drawn close, wrapped in a companionable silence. She turned to him, her voice a soft whisper. "What made you choose me?" He shook his head slightly, his eyes sincere. "Didn't choose you. I recognized you." Her breath hitched as she asked, "Recognize what?" He gently tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear and replied, "My kind." In that moment, she realized she had never truly been alone. The wind outside rustled through the trees, but within the walls of their home, she rested her head against his shoulder, not from exhaustion, but from the newfound ability to simply be. She had never needed rescuing. She had already rescued herself. Perhaps love isn't always about grand gestures and loud declarations. Perhaps it's about 2 mugs on a table, a coat hanging next to yours, a voice that reassures you don't have to shoulder every burden alone. And if you had seen her strolling through town that spring, her head held high, her skirt sweeping up dust in pride, you might not recognize the girl who was once left behind at an auction. She had stopped apologizing for her worth, and in doing so, the world began to elevate to meet her stature. And perhaps you, the one reading this with hands roughened by life's trials, maybe you've carried too much. Maybe you've heard the whispers, the deceit, the discouraging words. But let me tell you, listen, dear soul, let me share something with you. You are not adrift in this vast sea of existence. No, you are not forgotten, nor are you diminished by your struggles. Your toil does not define your worth. It only highlights your resilience. Your scars do not make you unlovable. They whisper tales of your journey. In your silence, there lies an unspoken strength, and in each breath, a silent symphony of beauty. One day, without pleading or crumbling your light, will be seen not by chance, but because you've always been worthy. Oh, what a moment that will be. As we close this chapter, I extend my heartfelt gratitude for joining us on this emotional voyage. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if our words have touched your heart, show your support by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Let's keep this dialogue of hope and healing alive together. Thank you for being part of our journey.